Okay, welcome to this live stream. Not sure who's on at the moment, but today we're going to be covering a very interesting topic, guys, which is proofs for God's existence. Now, it's probably one of the most interesting topics for individuals, especially in the times we live in, looking into the question of God, God's existence, proofs for God. You know, some people that are waking up to the understanding that there's more to life than what we're doing and how we're living, and they are in search of the purpose of life and meaning of life, and they realize that there has to be something there, someone there. When it comes to the question of God, the very first thing normally people ask about is proof. You know, if you have a discussion with an atheist, and if there's any atheists watching this right now, I'm sure, you know, as soon as someone approaches you or speaks to you about God, and even when you consider or think about God and the idea of God, the first thing that comes to your mind is, what's the proof? Where's the evidence, you know? And before I get into this topic and I discuss some proofs and share some arguments and share some thoughts regarding this topic, regarding the proofs of God and arguments for the God's existence, I want to lay down some foundational ideas first. And the very first thing I want to touch upon is the idea that we live in a time, we live in a reality, we live in a world which is very focused on seeing is believing, this type of ideology and understanding that unless I see something, unless something is in front of me, I can't believe it, right? Although this isn't true. Seeing isn't always believing. Most of the things that we believe in as human beings are not based on scientific empirical data, right? Most of the things we believe in are based on things like testimony, right? The hearsay of others, reasoning, just thinking about something deeply, reflecting over it, and then formulating beliefs regarding those things. However, this being the case, nevertheless, we live in a world which, you know, through our schooling and through, you know, our society and our upbringing, we are led to believe that unless we have physical proof for something, we cannot believe it. And even though this may not be taught to us directly like this, you know, someone doesn't come in one day and say to us, look, you can't believe in something until you can see it. Just the way it's embedded within our psyches over time, you know, the years that we grow up and all of this, and through the years of schooling, we end up with this way of looking at the world, right? Now, this being said, I'm not saying that, you know, there isn't empirical data for many things that we believe in this world. Of course there is. You know, many things, at least some things that we believe in is based on us seeing it. For example, I believe this book is real because it's in front of me. That's the reason I believe this book is it, because I can see it, I can hold it, I can feel it, X, Y, and Z. But there are other things that we believe in which are not based on empirical data, and we believe in them as strongly as we would that the book is in my hand. So, for example, some of us will, or not some of us, all of us will believe that our parents are our parents. So our mothers are our mother, and our fathers are our father. Now, when it comes to our mothers and fathers being our parents, we all believe this. We believe it as strongly as believing this book is right in front of me right now, right? However, when it comes to our parents, we come to this belief in a slightly different way. We don't come to it through empirical data, right? We come to the belief that our parents are our parents based on testimony, the testimony of our parents themselves. So we believe our parents based on what they've told us. And this is called authentic and valid testimony in the realms of philosophy, but we don't need to get into details regarding that. Key point to understand here is that there are many routes to knowledge. And as human beings, we utilize these different routes to knowledge to formulate beliefs about different things. So like I said, when it comes to the book that I showed you, I believe in this book because it's in front of me. When it comes to my parents, I believe my parents are my parents based on testimony. Even in the realm of science. So when scientists are studying a particular area in their discipline, what they would do is they would go of the testimony of previous scientists. So they will take the works of previous scientists, analyze them, and build their own work off of that, right? So there's an element of testimony even in the field of science itself, which in a general standpoint we would think, oh, it's only about science, it's only about empirical data. No, right? And I wanted to really get us to appreciate this before I go into discussing proofs for God, because a lot of us, a lot of people, a lot of non-Muslims, you know, a lot of people looking into Islam, a lot of atheists who call themselves atheists or agnostics, they have this sort of underlying assumption, which is that for you to believe in something, you have to have physical, tangible proof for it. And it's simply not the case. You know, I just wanted to go through this section prior just to highlight that there are many things we believe in which are not based on empirical data, right? Another example I can give you is syllogisms, deductive arguments. They're not necessarily based on empirical data. They're just a logical argument. We reason upon it. We think about it. For example, if I was to say to you, all men die, this is premise 1. John is a man, premise 2. Therefore, John will die, right? Now, this is the conclusion that John will die is a completely valid and sound conclusion based on the premises. Now, this is a logical argument. This is not based on empirical data, right? So there are many other routes to knowledge like this, right? And the reason I wanted to touch upon this before discussing proofs for God's existence is because I wanted to give us a more holistic understanding of what it means to believe in something. Beliefs are not simply formulated based upon empirical data, full stop. It doesn't work like this, right? We believe in many things for many different reasons, right? Now, that being said, the other foundational point I want to quickly touch upon is the understanding that when it comes to the belief in God from an Islamic perspective, we have to understand that God, who we refer to as Allah, God has told us in the Quran, which is the final revelation, that He is Allah, this is His name, that God did not create this life and He did not create us in this life to simply give it all away and just spoon feed us, right? He created us, He gave us certain faculties, He gave us certain abilities, He gave us our rational faculties to think and to reason, He made us conscious, right? He gave us life, so we can use all of these tools to look at reality, look at the signs of God, and then come to a conclusion that He exists, that we turn back to Him, right? And when we come to this conclusion, this is in line with already what we believe inside, which is a part of our nature, which I'll touch upon in a second. So the key point here to understand is God did not create us in this life to spoon feed us, essentially. He has given us all the faculties that we need. If used correctly, they would lead us to Him, right? They would lead us to Him. And He's put signs within this world. He's put signs there for us. So if we ponder over these signs, we reflect over these signs, they would lead us to Him. But it's not going to be the case where God says, look, here I am in front of you, although it's just a hypothetical point that I'm making. God is beyond the physical, He's beyond our imagination, He's unlike anything in existence. But God is not going to appear in front of you and say, look, here I am, now believe. It defeats the purpose of this life. Because God tells us in the Quran, for example, that a key aspect of this life is that we will be tested. And an element of this test is to see, can we use all of the abilities God has given us to find Him? To find Him and come to Him and turn back to Him. That's something key and very important that we need to understand. So God is not going to spoon feed us in this life, right? So it's not going to be the case and the reason I'm mentioning this is because many times when some non-Muslims, some atheists, unfortunately some of the aggressive atheists, not that all of them are the same, they will come to and approach Muslims and they say, look, show me, empirical data for God's existence. Why doesn't God come in front of us? Why doesn't He show Himself? And by the way, this was something that even at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, some of the Arabs would argue in this way. Why doesn't just God send angels down to the earth so they can appear in front of us and we can see them? And God tackles and addresses this mentality and mindset. For example, in another part of the Quran, God says, even if we opened up a stairway, a doorway into heaven, He opened up this dimension in the skies, and these people started to climb through this, and they could see everything in front of them physically, empirically, they can see what's going on. They would still deny this reality. They will say it's just our eyes have been bewitched. We're just being deluded. And through this, God highlights that there is an element of the human being that if that's corrupt, if the internal state of the disposition of the human being is corrupt, that type of person will deny any evidence. They could be shown all of the evidence clearly right in front of them. They can be given empirical data, they will still deny it. Another part of the Quran, God says, if we sent down scripture, pieces of paper, parchment, scripture right in front of them, and they could feel it with their own hands. This is what the Quran says. They could touch it with their own hands. They can tangibly validate it and have it right in front of them. They would still say, those that wanted to deny it because of the internal disposition, they would say, this is magic. This is just, something else. This is not revelation. This is just something else, right? And this should highlight to us that it's not empirical data which is going to cut it for people necessarily. It doesn't mean just because God will give you some clear empirical evidence. If that was the case, if God was to give you something clear that you could see through your senses, via your senses, that would therefore mean that these people would necessarily believe. No. Coming to the belief in something is not dependent upon empirical data. It also depends upon the internal state of the human being. And the human beings, the people that are sincere, that are humble, that are sincerely searching, for those type of people, a simple proof will be sufficient. A simple sign will be sufficient, right? So it all depends. A lot of coming to the realization and acknowledgement that we have a creator and turning back to him depends upon the internal state of the human being. What is the internal disposition of the person at that given moment? Are they arrogant? Are they just full of themselves? They just believe, they've already formulated a belief and they don't want to change this, and they're just asking for proof just for the sake of asking and to make a point? Or are they sincere? And are they sincerely searching for God? Because if they are sincere, those that are sincere, God will guide. God will show them the way. But you have to approach God and you have to approach revelation with humility and sincerity. Truly seeking. Humbling yourself, realizing that you are a limited human being that doesn't understand everything. That you don't have total knowledge, you don't have total power. You're just a limited, weak human being who is searching for the truth. And if you approach it with sincerity like this, you will find guidance. So this was the second point I wanted to mention, because it's very, very important to keep these things in mind. Number one, the first foundational point I mentioned was that empiricism or empirical data is not the only route to knowledge. There are other ways to formulate beliefs and come to a belief in something. Number two is that when you approach the question of God, you have to approach it with humility and sincerity. If you approach it with arrogance and bravado, you're just going to fail. You're not going to see the truth, because God is not in need of anything or anyone. God is independent. He is free. As in the Quran, he says he's ghani, which means he is the rich, the free of need. He doesn't depend on anything or anyone. He is as-samad, who is the eternal and absolute, but completely independent. And everything in existence is dependent upon him, and he is not dependent upon anything else. Right? So this is God. He's free. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need anything or anyone to worship him. Right? Us human beings, when we turn to our Creator and we search for him and we pray to him and we ask for guidance, we are actually benefiting ourselves. We're not benefiting God. Right? We cannot increase God in his majesty and his glory in any way, shape or form by by thinking that we're turning to him and we're doing God a favor. It doesn't work like that. God is free of need, right? So we need to humble ourselves in approaching the question of God. The third point I want to mention, the third foundational point I want to quickly mention, is the understanding that there is an aspect of the knowledge of God, the reality of God, which is embedded and it's placed within every single human soul, every single human nature. In Islam, in the Islamic tradition, this is referred to as the fitrah. The fitrah, meaning, generally speaking, is that first pure nature that every single human being is created upon. And a part of this nature encapsulates the knowledge of God. So the knowledge that there is a creator. Some of the scholars even went as far as saying that he is one and that he deserves worship, that were created to worship him. The understanding, the knowledge of this is embedded within every single human soul. However, due to our society, as per one of the traditions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he said that every child is born upon the fitrah, this natural disposition, but it's his parents that make him otherwise. They take him away from this straight, pure path. So it's our societies, our surroundings, our environments that cover and cloud this internal reality, this piece of knowledge which is embedded within the human being. Now, just a point on this, what's interesting is, from a Western perspective, this idea of innate knowledge would come as a surprise to many, because we're not accustomed to this, these ideas based on our limited understanding and our limited knowledge, right? The way we're taught, as I mentioned before in the beginning, the way we're taught to think about the world, generally, that's embedded within our minds, is that seeing is believing. We need to acquire knowledge. You're a blank slate, right? You're a absolute blank slate, and you have to use your faculties and use your senses to acquire knowledge of the world around you, to formulate beliefs and to understand the world. This is not necessarily what we are taught in Islam. In Islam, it's slightly different. Yes, there is an element where the human being utilizes his senses and utilizes his abilities and his rational faculties to attain knowledge of things around him and to learn new things. But there is an element, or there is a type of knowledge which is already embedded within every single human being. And this is the fitrah. This is embedded within the fitrah, the nature. And a part of this knowledge is the recognition and understanding that there is a creator. That's already within every single human soul. So that being said, if we keep these 3 points that I've just mentioned in mind, and then we go into the discussion of proofs for God's existence, or the signs for God's existence, as I would say is more correct to refer to them as, we will really appreciate this, and we will be in the right psychological and spiritual state to now assess or come to the truth of God, right? It's very, very important, because many times when we get engaged in a discussion with non-Muslims, and hopefully there's non-Muslims that watch this, and if you're a Muslim that's watching this, please share this with your non-Muslim friends as well. Many times when we engage with non-Muslims, or non-Muslims approach Muslims and they ask the question of God's existence, we normally straight away go into giving proofs for God's existence, right? And we assume that their position is correct in that everything needs to be proven, right? When if we really understand the 3 points I've mentioned, which are number one, that there are different routes to knowledge, and empiricism or physical evidence is not the only route to knowledge. Number two, that we have to humble ourselves. God is not in need of us, but we are in need of Him. And we have to have humility in our approach to this question of God. And number three, that there is an element of knowledge which is already embedded within the human being. So it's a case of being reminded of the truth, not being taught something new when it comes to God's existence. When we understand these 3 points, it will make that discussion that we have much more fruitful, and it gives people the right perspective when it comes to God's existence. Now, understanding this, when it comes to God's existence, what I want to do is, and by the way, if you guys have any questions, please do leave them in the comments section below. We'll be more than happy to help and try to address your questions. So when it comes to God's existence, yes, there is an innate aspect of this, that the knowledge of God is already within every single human being, but to remind ourselves, to refresh that truth that's within us, and to awaken that truth from within, there are some very powerful rational reasons, rational arguments that we use, which point towards the signs of God, right? So one sign, or one, let's call it proof and a sign that I want to point us towards, is that as human beings, when we see something, when we see an object, we can recognize just by reasoning about it that this object was created by something or designed, right? So for example, if I show you guys this bottle, right? And if I said to you guys that this bottle created itself, it made itself, it formed itself, no one will believe me. Whether you're an atheist, an agnostic, a Christian, a Muslim, whoever you are, you won't believe that a bottle like this can make itself or form itself. It just doesn't make sense. And if I pushed a little further and I asked you the question, okay, why don't you believe this bottle can make itself or form itself? You would say, when you analyze the bottle, you say, well, look, it has a shape, it has function, it has a purpose, it's designed to contain water, it has a screw-on lid, so it has different parts, which are precisely designed in order to fit with each other, X, Y, and Z. And for all of these reasons, this particular bottle cannot make itself. It must have a designer or a creator, right? Very simple. Simple reasoning. Every single human being can do this. Now, let's apply the same question to the universe. When we look at this entire universe, this entire cosmos, the universe, we can argue, is far greater than this bottle in every way, shape, or form. It's much larger. It's far more precisely, organized. There are laws within the universe, the laws of logic, the laws of physics, the laws of mathematics. There is fine-tuning within the universe. The universe is ordered and is functioning. It's allowing for intelligent life to exist, X, Y, and Z. Now, when we look at this universe, the same question applies. If a simple bottle requires a designer or a creator, then what about this entire universe? By greater reason, the entire universe must surely have a creator or a designer. I would say we stick to the word creator because as Muslims we stick to what God has told us about Himself and the names and the way God has referred to Himself. So we would say the entire universe must surely have a creator. right? A fashioner, a maintainer, a sustainer, right? It's a very simple point. And again, if you are sincere and you are honest with yourself and you reflect upon this point, hold on a second, something as simple as a bottle needs a creator because of its simple features and functions and parts, then shouldn't the universe, which is far more complex, far greater, has far better order, shouldn't the universe must surely have a creator? It just logically makes sense. And it makes sense here, and it's in line with what's in here. It will acknowledge what's in your heart already because that knowledge is already there of God, right? That's as simple as it is. We don't need complicated arguments. And this particular argument is elaborated in a far more beautiful way in the Quran itself, in chapter 52, verse 35 and 36, where God asks some very profound questions. And He's asking us the questions. He's getting us to think about these questions. And normally when a human being, when we ask the question, automatically what we start to do is we look for answers. So God asks us in this chapter, in these verses, He says, He said, look, or were they created by nothing? Ask yourself the question, can we come from nothing? Can anything come from nothing? The answer is no. Because out of nothing, nothing comes. It just doesn't make sense, right? And then He says, or were they the creators of themselves? Can you create yourself? Again, ask yourself the question. And if you sincerely ask yourself this question, you realize, hold on a second, how is it even possible to create yourself? Because to create yourself, you have to already exist. And if you already exist and you're already there, then you're not really creating yourself because you're already there. It's a paradox. It's a contradiction. You can't have that. It just doesn't make sense. And then God says in the next verse, or were they the creators, us and the people that were being addressed originally and everyone else by extension, are we the creators of the heavens and the earth? Did we create this entire universe? And again, that just doesn't make any sense. We can't do so. We can never do such a thing. On top of this, the universe existed far before we came into existence. So how can we now create something which existed prior to us? It doesn't make any sense, right? And then God leaves the only conclusion open for us to conclude. So we can't come from nothing. We can't make ourselves. We can't create other things which exist before us and prior to us. Therefore, there has to be a creator that created everything that exists. Right? Again, very simple reasoning, very simple logic. And if we follow through and we're sincere with this, we'll come to the conclusion that there has to be a creator. There has to be a creator, a being that's there. Right? And I will leave it at that. It's as simple as that. And look, another point, just to really tie up what I'm saying, what I said in the beginning regarding those 3 points. If someone wants to deny the truth, you can give them the most powerful argument in the world. You can give them empirical data, as God mentions in the Quran, right? You can give them something right in front of their face, and if they want to deny it, they will deny it, right? Beliefs are not fully necessarily contingent upon a particular proof, right? So what I mean by that is, depending on the state of the person, if someone is sincere and someone is searching and is humble, a very simple point, a very simple occurrence in their life could lead them to that truth which already resides within the human being. For example, I'll give you a hypothetical example, say someone is very humble and sincere individual and something happens in their life. They pray for something and it happens, it takes place. Or they get a small sign in their own life, a personal sign, and they reflect upon that sign. And that awakens the truth within that person. And they turn back to their creator. And on the opposite end of the scale, you'll have the type of person who can be shown, for example, like the people God mentions in the Quran, even if a gateway, a dimension opens up for these people and they start to ascend and climb through it, they will say, look, our eyes have just deceived us. Why? Because of their internal state. They don't want to believe. Right? And there's many examples of this on YouTube. There's experiments done by people where they go to individuals who just don't want to believe. They say, look, if I was to be able to prove to you that God exists without a shadow of a doubt, and I gave you the proof that you want, that you desire, would you then worship Him? And they said no. And this highlights the eternal state of the individual. It's not about the type of proof. It's not about empirical data or a rational argument or a life experience. It could be any of these things. It primarily depends upon the state of the human being that's receiving these proofs and that's receiving these signs. Whether they will make sense to them, whether they will adhere to them, whether it will create an awakening within them, right? That's the reality. right? And as we said, God is not in need of us. God is not in need of the atheist who arrogantly denies him and then thinks that he's in the position or she's in the position to judge whether God exists or not. No, God is not in need of such people. God is not in need of anything or anyone or any person. He's free of need. When we realize that we need him, when we realize that life doesn't make sense without him, when we realize that life falls apart in the absence of God and nothing makes sense, that you end up in this state where everything becomes meaningless and purposeless without God. Because without God, what's the reality of life? Without God, everything is a result of just random physical stuff. That's it. And when we realize that, hold on a second, this doesn't make sense, and we humble ourselves, then we are in the right state and we're primed to receive guidance from the Creator of the heavens and the earth. And I want to conclude by just drawing our attention to anyone that's sincerely looking and searching and maybe has found benefit in this, to read the Quran. But I would say start with reading the 112th chapter and start by reading the first chapter of the Quran, because these two chapters are very powerful. The first chapter of the Quran, what it will give you is it'll give you an introduction to or God himself introduces himself to us and introduces our relationship with him. And the 112th chapter, what that will tell you in a very simple short chapter, God introduces himself, who he is. And I really encourage you guys to read these two chapters to start with, right? And then to move on to other parts of the Quran. So start with the first chapter of the Quran and then read the 112th chapter of the Quran. And this will give you a nice introduction as to the message and as to who God is. And what you'll realize is when you learn about God in Islam and what he says about himself, it will, and really pay attention to this, because you'll realize that it'll be in line with what you already recognize deep down inside you. That God is one. He's unlike anything you can imagine. He's all powerful. He has no beginning. He has no end, right? These things will make sense to you. So hopefully I've given you guys some food for thought, something to think about and reflect upon. And, if you, like I said, if you have any questions, if you have any queries, anyone that's looking to become Muslim, please leave your comments below and we would love to address you guys and get back to you. I thank you guys for listening. We'll try to, again, like I said, I know I intend on doing these more regularly, but for one reason or the other, I get busy with other things and I'm not able to. But hopefully we'll do this more regularly, maybe once a week, touching upon different topics and important topics like this. And just to give you guys the references again, so if anyone that wants to revisit the argument for God's existence that I presented from the Quran, is chapter 52, verse 35 and 36. Anyone that wants sort of a brief introduction to who God is and our relationship with him, read the 112th chapter of the Quran and the first chapter of the Quran, and this should suffice from that perspective. Thank you guys for listening.